The $50 million man wouldn't stand. In a courtroom where even billionaires rise for Black Judge Monica Lee, Sterling Blackwood remained seated, casually flipping through his notes. His Italian leather shoes crossed at the ankles, his gold watch catching the fluorescent light with each dismissive page turn. The gallery's whispers grew to a steady hum. They'd never seen anyone dare to challenge the Iron Lady of the Ninth Circuit. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees when Judge Lee entered. Her black robe whispered against marble floors as she approached the bench, each step measured, deliberate. The bailiff's voice cracked through the air. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Monica Lee." Everyone stood, everyone except Sterling. His lawyer tugged desperately at his sleeve, but Sterling merely smirked, his slicked back hair gleaming as he turned another page. After all, men like him made the rules. They didn't follow them. But Judge Lee didn't bark orders, didn't demand respect. Instead, she smiled. The kind of smile that made Sterling's lawyer take 3 steps back. The kind of smile that had ended careers of men twice as powerful as Sterling. She knew something buried in the courthouse records for 15 years. Something that would make Sterling's $50 million look like pocket change. What happened in the next 10 minutes wouldn't just destroy Sterling's empire. It would expose a secret that would shake the foundations of the entire legal system. A secret that would make headlines from New York to Shanghai. And by the time you finish this video, you'll understand why this case isn't just about one man's arrogance. It's about the day justice finally caught up with the untouchable. Stay with me, because what comes next? Even the court stenographer couldn't believe what she was typing. Sterling Blackwood wasn't just another wealthy businessman. He was the kind of rich that made headlines. He owned sprawling mansions on both coasts, threw lavish parties attended by celebrities, and traveled in private jets. To outsiders, he seemed untouchable, a symbol of success. But behind the glitz and glamour lay a dark truth. Sterling's empire, Sterling Investments, was built on deception. He promised small business owners and middle-class families a brighter future, luring them to invest their life savings in his schemes. Retirement accounts, college funds, even entire inheritances vanished into thin air under his fraudulent plans. To him, it was just business. The devastation he left behind was staggering. Families lost their homes, parents struggled to feed their children, and elderly couples faced their golden years in crushing poverty. Angela Martinez, a single mother of 3, had believed Sterling's promises. She invested her savings, only to lose everything. Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter, spent decades saving for retirement, only to end up in his brother's spare room. While his victims fought to rebuild their shattered lives, Sterling flaunted his wealth. He threw extravagant parties and gave interviews, brushing off his legal troubles as minor inconveniences. "I've got the best lawyers money can buy," he told reporters outside his Malibu mansion. "This will blow over. It always does." His confidence seemed unshakable, even as investigators uncovered piles of evidence against him. Falsified documents, bank records, and whistleblower testimonies painted a damning picture. Yet Sterling acted as if he were invincible. He delayed the trial for months with legal maneuvers, portraying himself as a misunderstood entrepreneur and scapegoat. The courtroom was packed with people seeking justice. Victims like Angela and Peter sat side by side, their faces etched with pain and determination. This trial wasn't just about Sterling Blackwood. It was about holding the powerful accountable. But Sterling didn't care. His smirk never wavered, as though he believed the system would bend to his will, just as it always had. The courtroom grew heavier with emotion as the stories of Sterling Blackwood's victims unfolded. Each testimony added another layer of heartbreak, painting a vivid picture of lives destroyed by his greed. Angela Martinez, a widowed mother of 3, was the first to take the stand. She clutched a tissue in her hand, her voice trembling as she recounted her family's ordeal. "I trusted him," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I thought I was securing a future for my children. Instead, we lost everything: our home, our stability, our hope." She paused, her voice cracking. "My kids had to sleep in our car for 2 weeks. Do you know what it feels like to tell your children there's no roof over their heads?" The room was silent except for the faint sound of Angela's sobs. Sterling sat unbothered, leaning back in his chair and scrolling on his phone, completely detached from the pain he had caused. Next was Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter who had spent decades running into burning buildings to save others. His voice was heavy with suppressed anger as he spoke. I worked for 35 years, risking my life every day so I could have a secure retirement. Now I'm living in my brother's spare room, wondering if I'll ever get my life back. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. This man burned my future to the ground without a second thought. The ripple effects of Sterling's fraud were devastating. Families were uprooted, children's dreams were shattered, and elderly couples faced their twilight years in financial ruin. One after another, victims took the stand. Each voice carried the weight of betrayal and despair. A father shared how he'd been forced to sell his family's heirloom farm, land that had been in their family for generations. A young woman sobbed as she revealed that her wedding savings had vanished overnight. An elderly couple described the humiliation of losing their home and relying on a local shelter for meals. Through it all, Sterling remained detached. He often whispered jokes to his lawyer or glanced at the clock, his smug expression a stark contrast to the raw emotion filling the room. It was clear to everyone present that he viewed these testimonies as mere noise, irrelevant details that wouldn't alter the outcome he believed was already in his favor. The prosecutor's voice cut through the tension as she addressed the courtroom. These stories aren't isolated incidents. They are the direct result of one man's greed. Sterling Blackwood didn't just take money, he took futures, dreams, and stability. Judge Monica Lee's eyes remained fixed on Sterling, her expression unreadable, but her presence commanding. The victim's pain was real, and she would not let it be dismissed. The press eagerly covered every detail, capturing the tears, anger, and despair of those seeking justice. Headlines screamed about Sterling's arrogance and lack of remorse, further fueling public outrage. The courtroom had become a stage for a battle between privilege and accountability. As the testimonies continued, something began to shift in the room. The victims' voices, once trembling, grew stronger. Their pain turned into resolve, their fear into courage. Angela Martinez stood tall as she finished her testimony, her eyes locking with Sterling's. "You destroyed my family's future," she said, her voice steady now. "But you will not break our spirit. Justice will be served." The audience murmured in agreement, their anger now tempered with hope. Sterling's smirk faltered slightly, though his confidence remained unshaken. He still believed he could escape unscathed. But the tide was turning. The power of the victims' stories was undeniable, and for the first time, it seemed Sterling might not walk away so easily. The courtroom, once dominated by his arrogance, now carried the weight of collective determination. Justice was no longer an abstract concept. It was a force, growing stronger with every voice that spoke. The prosecution wasted no time cutting through the charade Sterling Blackwood and his legal team had built. Day by day, the evidence stacked higher, each piece more damning than the last. Bank records, falsified contracts, and incriminating emails painted a clear picture of calculated greed. The defining moment came when the prosecutor presented a series of emails sent directly from Sterling's account. Each word was a nail in the coffin. One email read aloud by the prosecutor caused audible gasps from the audience. "Make the numbers look good. We need these suckers to sign on the dotted line." The room fell into a stunned silence as the words lingered in the air. Angela Martinez, seated in the front row, shook her head in disbelief. Peter Vaughn clenched his jaw, his anger barely contained. For Sterling, however, it was business as usual. He leaned back in his chair, smirking as if he were untouchable. The prosecutor turned toward Sterling, her tone sharp and unwavering. "Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this email?" Before Sterling could answer, his lawyer jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor. This question was addressed in pretrial hearings." Judge Lee raised her hand, her voice calm but firm. "Overruled. The defendant will answer the question." Sterling leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "Yes, I recognize it, but let's not pretend it means what you're implying. It's just business talk. You wouldn't understand." The crowd erupted in whispers, a wave of disbelief rippling through the room. Judge Lee's gavel struck with authority, silencing the noise. "Order in the court," she commanded, her gaze locking onto Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, I suggest you adjust your tone. This is not a boardroom. and you are not above these proceedings." Despite the warning, Sterling's arrogance remained unshaken. His smirk returned as if the trial was just a minor inconvenience. The prosecutor, undeterred, continued presenting a relentless barrage of evidence. Witness after witness took the stand, each testimony painting an undeniable picture of fraud and exploitation. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens racing to capture the drama. Victims watched intently, their hope pinned on the prosecution's ability to dismantle Sterling's defense. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the mountain of evidence was impossible to ignore. Sterling's legal team scrambled to counter the damage, but the cracks in their strategy were glaring. Still, Sterling sat unbothered, his confidence unwavering, as if he believed the verdict was already in his favor. But the growing tension in the room told a different story. The tide was shifting, and Sterling Blackwood was finally feeling the weight of the justice he had long evaded. Angela Martinez took the stand, her hands trembling as she clutched a folded piece of paper. The weight of her pain was evident in her eyes, but her resolve shone through. The courtroom was silent as she began to speak, her voice shaky but determined. "I believed him," she said, her gaze fixed on Sterling Blackwood. "I trusted him with everything I had. He promised me security, a better future for my kids. But instead, he destroyed everything." Angela described the day her world fell apart. The mortgage company had called to inform her that her home was being repossessed. She begged for leniency, but it was too late. "My children and I slept in our car for 2 weeks," she continued, her voice breaking. "Do you know what it's like to tell your kids that there's nowhere to go? That you've failed them?" Tears streamed down her face as she unfolded the paper in her hands. "This is a list of everything we lost because of him," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A home, a sense of safety, and the dreams I had for my children's future." Sterling sat back in his chair, casually scrolling through his phone, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of Angela's words. His blatant disregard for her testimony sparked murmurs of outrage from the crowd. The prosecutor, visibly angered, turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness." All eyes shifted to Judge Monica Lee. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice firm, "put your phone away, now." Sterling glanced up, unfazed. "I was just checking something important," he said, holding up the device as if to prove his point. The judge's tone hardened. "I said now." For a moment it seemed Sterling might argue, but he reluctantly placed the phone down. The tension in the room was palpable, but the damage had already been done. Angela's voice faltered as she continued, her disbelief evident. "Even now he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the lives he's ruined." By the time Angela finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Sterling's. The audience sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Angela stepped down, her head held high, as the crowd exchanged glances filled with anger and admiration. This moment was more than a testimony, it was a turning point. The courtroom, once dominated by Sterling's arrogance, now bristled with the determination of those seeking justice. Sterling Blackwood's legal team took the floor with an air of confidence, but the cracks in their strategy were immediately apparent. Their first move was to discredit the witnesses, painting them as individuals who had misunderstood the risks of investing. They argued that Sterling was merely a scapegoat for broader financial failures. One by one, they attempted to twist the narratives of the victims, implying that their losses were due to poor decisions rather than Sterling's fraudulent schemes. The defense lawyer's tone was calm, but condescending as he cross-examined Angela Martinez. "Mrs. Martinez, did you read the fine print before signing the agreement?" Angela's voice was steady as she responded, "I trusted the promises your client made. He said it was a safe investment. I believed him." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, and the lawyer's smug grin faltered slightly. The defense shifted tactics, portraying Sterling as a victim of overzealous prosecutors and a biased media. "My client is a hard-working entrepreneur who has been unfairly vilified," the lawyer declared, gesturing toward Sterling. But his words rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. Sterling's behavior didn't help their case. He smirked during cross-examinations and whispered sarcastic remarks to his lawyer, further irritating the audience and even the jury. The tension in the room grew as the defense fumbled to counter the prosecutor's airtight arguments. Judge Monica Lee observed the proceedings with her usual calm demeanor, but her patience with Sterling's antics was visibly wearing thin. She rarely intervened, allowing the defense to present their case, but her sharp gaze was a constant reminder of the authority she wielded. By the time the defense rested, their arguments felt weak and disjointed. The audience exchanged knowing looks. Sterling's team wasn't just fighting an uphill battle, they were losing ground rapidly. Sterling, however, appeared unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, still convinced that his wealth and influence would tip the scales in his favor. But the tide of the trial had shifted. The evidence against him was undeniable, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation for what would come next. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the air buzzing with anticipation as Judge Monica Lee prepared to deliver her verdict. Reporters crowded the back rows, their pens poised to capture every word. Victims filled the seats, their faces a mix of anger, hope, and trepidation. All eyes were on Sterling Blackwood, who sat at the defense table with his usual smug demeanor, his confidence unshaken. Judge Lee began, her voice steady and deliberate. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence presented against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims paint a devastating picture of your actions." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He appeared detached, as if the weight of her words didn't apply to him. But the tension in the room was palpable, each word striking like a hammer. "You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed the lives of countless people," Judge Lee continued. "Your actions were not mistakes or errors in judgment. They were deliberate, calculated decisions made for personal gain, with no regard for the suffering you caused." Angela Martinez sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together. Tears streamed down her face as the judge's words echoed through the room. Peter Vaughn, seated beside her, nodded solemnly, his jaw clenched in quiet satisfaction. Judge Lee's tone shifted, becoming colder, more resolute. "Throughout this trial, Mr. Sterling, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of disgraceful. You have insulted your victims, disregarded this court's authority, and treated these proceedings as if they were beneath you." Sterling's smugness began to crack. He straightened in his chair, his smirk faltering for the first time. The crowd, sensing the shift, leaned forward in their seats, hanging on to every word. "Justice," Judge Lee declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "is not about wealth, power, or privilege. It is about accountability. And today, you will face the consequences of your actions." The room was silent, save for the faint rustle of paper. Sterling's confidence dissolved as Judge Lee announced his sentence. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Gasps erupted from the audience. Sterling's face turned pale, the blood draining from his cheeks. He had expected a slap on the wrist, a lenient punishment that would allow him to return to his life of luxury. But this was a sentence he hadn't even considered. Judge Lee wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated." The courtroom broke into stunned murmurs. Angela Martinez covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. Peter Vaughn leaned back in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, there was a sense of vindication, a glimmer of hope that justice had prevailed. Sterling shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "I'm Sterling Blackwood. You can't treat me like some common criminal." Judge Lee's gavel slammed down with a resounding crack. "Mr. Sterling, sit down," she commanded, her voice unwavering. But Sterling wasn't finished. "This is a joke. I'll appeal this. I'll have your career ruined," he raged, his voice growing louder with each word. The bailiffs moved closer, ready to intervene. Judge Lee remained calm, her expression unyielding. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Sterling, and you will show respect. Bailiffs, escort the defendant out." As Sterling was led away, his protest grew fainter with each step. The courtroom erupted into applause, a rare and powerful display of emotion that felt entirely appropriate for the moment. Judge Lee turned to the audience, her expression softening just slightly. "Justice has been served," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "Let this be a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." As the crowd began to disperse, the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. For the victims, this wasn't just a verdict. It was a moment of validation, a chance to begin rebuilding their lives. Sterling Blackwood's arrogance had finally met its match, and in that courtroom, justice had prevailed. As the courtroom emptied, the buzz of excitement lingered in the air. For the victims, this moment was a mix of triumph and bittersweet relief. The verdict had been delivered, but the scars Sterling Blackwood left behind would take far longer to heal. Angela Martinez stood outside the courthouse, clutching her purse tightly. Her face was a mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. A reporter approached her with a microphone. "How do you feel after today's verdict?" they asked. Angela hesitated, her eyes reflecting the weight of everything she'd endured. "I feel relieved," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "But the truth is, no sentence can erase the damage he caused. My kids and I are still rebuilding, and that will take time. But at least now, we have hope. We know justice is possible." Nearby, Peter Vaughn spoke with a friend, his hands gesturing emphatically. "It's not just about the years he got," Peter said, shaking his head. "It's about the message this sends. People like him think they're untouchable. Today proved they're not." The victims weren't the only ones reflecting on the trial's outcome. Inside her chambers, Judge Monica Lee sat quietly, staring out the window at the commotion below. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of the decision she had made. She didn't feel triumph or victory. Her role was never about personal satisfaction. For her, justice was about fairness, about ensuring that the scales balanced no matter how heavy the weight of privilege on one side. Sterling Blackwood's name would continue to dominate headlines, but for those he had wronged, the chapter was finally closing. Families like Angela's could begin to rebuild, using the restitution to piece together what had been lost. The money wouldn't replace the memories, the homes, or the dreams shattered by Sterling's greed. But it was a start. The streets outside the courthouse were alive with energy. Reporters jostled for position, microphones in hand, eager to capture the story that had gripped the nation. Camera flashes illuminated the faces of victims as they stepped into the sunlight, their expressions a mix of relief and resilience. Angela's youngest daughter, Sophia, stood beside her mother, clutching her hand tightly. Though she was too young to fully understand the magnitude of what had happened, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "does this mean we can have our home back?" Angela knelt down, pulling Sophia into a tight embrace. "It means we can start over," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "It means we can dream again." Across the country, Sterling Blackwood's trial sparked conversations about accountability and justice. People shared their own stories of betrayal and resilience, finding strength in the verdict. Social media platforms lit up with discussions, hashtags trending as the story reached millions. The trial had become a rallying cry, a reminder that even the powerful could be held to account. Perhaps the most powerful moment came days later, when a local newspaper published a letter from Sophia Martinez to Judge Lee. In it, the young girl wrote, "Thank you for standing up for my family. Thank you for showing us that people like Sterling Blackwood can't get away with hurting people like us. You didn't just give us justice, you gave us hope." The letter quickly went viral, sparking a wave of support for victims of fraud and injustice. It became a symbol of resilience and the importance of integrity in the face of adversity. For Judge Lee, it was a poignant reminder of why she had chosen her path. Sitting in her office, she folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer alongside other reminders of the lives she had impacted. She didn't seek recognition or praise. Her focus was on ensuring that justice prevailed, one case at a time. Sterling Blackwood's story would serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. It was more than just a courtroom drama. It was a testament to the resilience of ordinary people and the power of accountability. For Angela, Peter, and countless others, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by loss, but by hope. Sterling Blackwood's trial was more than just a story about greed and arrogance. It was a wake-up call. It showed the world that justice can prevail, even against the powerful and privileged. But as the dust settled, one question lingered. What does accountability truly mean? For the victims, accountability meant restitution and the chance to rebuild their lives. For Angela Martinez, it was knowing her children would no longer have to live in fear of the future. For Peter Vaughn, it was a reminder that the sacrifices he made in his life would not be in vain. This trial was a rallying cry, a reminder that fairness and integrity are not just lofty ideals, but responsibilities that every individual must uphold. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of injustice, to believe that the system is rigged in favor of those who already hold the cards. But this case proved otherwise. It showed that resilience and unity could tip the scales. Judge Monica Lee's unwavering resolve sent a powerful message. No one is above the law. Her calm authority reminded everyone that justice is not about wealth or status. It's about doing what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. As the nation reflected on the trial, conversations began to shift. People started to question their own roles in promoting fairness and holding others accountable. They shared stories, sparked debates, and found inspiration in the strength of those who stood up against Sterling Blackwood's crimes. So as you think about this story, ask yourself, what does accountability mean in your own life? How can you ensure fairness and justice in the choices you make every day? Because justice isn't just the responsibility of the courts. It's a principle we must all fight for, in big ways and small. The story of Sterling Blackwood may have ended in a courtroom, but its lessons ripple far beyond those walls. It's a reminder that while greed and deception can cause unimaginable harm, resilience, integrity, and the pursuit of justice will always shine brighter.